The night the violin player walked into Delia Quinn's saloon, he was carrying a case with one broken clasp and the kind of silence men usually drag behind a coffin. Dust coated him to the knees. Blood had dried dark at one cuff. And when Cleet Banner shoved little Mateo Ruiz hard enough to send a whiskey tray spinning and then raised a pistol at the boy for dropping it, the stranger did not duck, plead, or glance toward the door. He set the violin case beneath his chair, laid one steady hand over Mateo's shaking wrist, and said, "If you're set on shooting somebody tonight, pick a man who can hold still for it." The room went still in that sharp, listening way a room does when violence has already chosen its chair and only hasn't sat down yet. Cleet was broad through the shoulders and mean in the mouth. He smelled of sour mash and wet leather. Delia Quinn watched from behind the bar with a towel twisted hard in both hands. Because in a town like Juniper Crossing, Wyoming Territory, you learned fast that there were nights when a woman's face had to stay calm even while her pulse tried to kick a hole through her ribs. The stranger did not reach for a gun. Delia noticed that first. Men who wanted folks to know they were dangerous always showed steel. This one only stood there with the boy half behind him and his left sleeve pulled low over whatever wound had bled through the cuff. He was lean in the way hard winters make a man lean. His coat had been good once. His boots were resoled twice over. His beard looked grown for concealment rather than vanity. Cleet gave a laugh too ugly to belong to joy. "You always this brave for children?" "No," the stranger said. "Only when the man pointing the gun is the sort who'd miss and hit the bottle shelf." A few men coughed into their glasses to hide a grin. Cleet's ears went red. He swung the pistol toward the stranger's chest. Then Delia saw the second thing that mattered. The stranger's eyes did not leave Cleet's thumb on the hammer. He was not watching the barrel. He was watching the hand. Men who had never been hunted watched the gun. Men who had stood too close to death learned better. "Cleet," Delia said, voice level as table wood, "if you shoot in my place, you'll pay for every broken thing till your grandchildren are poor." He might have fired anyway. Pride had a way of making fools permanent. But the stranger reached into his own pocket, brought out his last 2 coins, and set them on the table beside the ruined tray. "For the whiskey," he said. And the boy, something in that landed. Maybe it was the insult of being bought off in front of an audience. Maybe it was that Cleet wanted to keep his temper and his dignity and found he could only leave with one of them. He spat on the floor, holstered the pistol, and shoved past the stranger hard enough to bump his shoulder. The stranger did not move an inch. Mateo clung to the back of his coat like a burr. The room loosened one breath at a time. The stranger bent, picked up the violin case, and asked Delia, "You still need a player?" His voice was low and even, with none of the brag men usually wrapped around a talent. Delia looked at the piano in the corner with 3 dead keys, and then at the supper pot going thin on the stove. "Can you play over a room full of bad manners?" He glanced once toward the swinging doors where Cleet had gone. "Ma'am, I can play over weather." That got him the smallest smile she'd worn all week. "Then set yourself near the stove. Folks spend freer when they think they're living prettier than they are. Before we go any further, settle in wherever you are tonight, and if you feel like it, tell us in the comments what corner of the world you're listening from. We like knowing who's sitting by the fire with us. Then come on back to Juniper Crossing, because that was the last quiet breath Delia Quinn took for a very long time." He tuned by ear, quick and exact. When he drew the first note, conversation thinned at the edges. It was not fancy playing. Delia had heard fancy. Fancy belonged to hotels and men with soft hands. What came out of that violin was something leaner and truer, like cold water over stones. The room shifted toward it without meaning to. Even the card players quieted. Mateo settled cross-legged near the stove, eyes wide as church windows. Delia polished glasses and watched him between customers. He played like a man who understood how to make sorrow stand up straight. No flourish, no showing off. Just one clear thread of sound after another, steady enough to hold on to. Twice she caught him looking not at the crowd, but at the door, then the window, then the mirror behind the bar. Counting exits, measuring strangers. He did it without seeming to. That, more than the blood on his cuff, told her trouble knew his given name. Near midnight the room thinned to ranch hands, a pair of freight drovers, and old Mrs. Sutter, who sold eggs with the same hand she used to swat liars. The stranger finished a tune, lowered the bow, and accepted a bowl of stew as if he had not eaten warm food in days. He thanked Delia like the bowl was a kindness he had no right to expect. "What do they call you?" she asked. He hesitated just long enough to be heard. "Elias Shaw." Folks who hesitate over their own name usually ain't saying it. He met her eyes then, and for the first time she saw the ruin in him plain. Not fear. Fear moved around. This was grief that had sat down and built a house. "It'll do till morning," he said. She should have sent him on. Delia knew that even then, a widow running a saloon in a cattle town could not afford mysteries with shoulders. But there was a way he had placed himself between that gun and Mateo without asking who the boy belonged to. And Delia had spent enough years among men to know goodness when it walked in dirty and pretending otherwise. So she gave him stew and a corner room upstairs and told herself that was all. It was not all. An hour before dawn, with the stove gone low and the stars paling above Front Street, the doors banged inward hard enough to rattle the lamp chimneys. A girl of about 14 stumbled in barefoot, hair half loose, apron spotted with mud. "They took Pa," she gasped. "Mr. Creed's riders took him off the creek road. Mama said fetch Miss Quinn. Mama said fetch anybody brave." The name dropped into the room like a nail in a coffin lid. Delia felt Elias go still behind her. Not the ordinary stillness of a tired man. A dangerous, listening stillness. "Who took him?" he asked. The girl swallowed. "Benton Crow and the other one with the split ear. They said my pa was squatting on Creed water." Juniper Crossing had been living under the shadow of Jonas Creed for 3 years. He owned cattle enough to blacken a hillside, land enough to change a map, and half the sheriff's spine besides. Men like Creed never said they were stealing. They called it settling titles, improving the territory, correcting mistakes. Folks still lost everything just the same. Delia came out from behind the bar, already tying on her coat. "Mateo, wake Mr. Baines at the livery. Tell him to saddle my mare." Elias set down the violin before the last note in the room had finished dying. "I'm coming." "No," Delia said. "Yes. You don't know this valley. I know men who send riders in the dark." That was answer enough to make her dislike how much she trusted it. They found the girl's father in a dry wash east of town, tied to a cottonwood with his face swollen and one boot missing. 40 yards off, face down in the sage, lay a stranger in a government coat with a bullet under his shoulder blade and dust packed in his mouth. Land office papers had spilled from his satchel. One map, corner flapped in the wind like a white flag no one intended to honor. Delia knelt by the dead man. Elias was already scanning sign, crouched low, fingertips hovering over the ground. 3 riders, he said. Maybe 4. Crow's horse throws wide on the right hind. One man dismounted here. Drag marks to the tree. They searched the body before they left. She looked at him sharply. "You track?" He did not answer that. His gaze had settled on the dead man's hand, where a silver ring caught the growing light. Engraved inside, almost worn smooth, was a tiny C. Elias closed his eyes once. Only once. But Delia saw the blow land. "You know that mark," she said. He stood too fast. "Get the girl's father home. Don't let the sheriff near the satchel before you've seen every paper in it." "You know that mark," she repeated. "It belongs to Creed cattle and land." The way he said it was wrong for a man speaking of a stranger. It carried memory. By the time they got back to town, the first stage of the morning had rolled in under a sky the color of old tin. Sheriff Hollis Wren was on the boardwalk, polishing one thumb over the same spot on his badge the way he did whenever he meant to look official without doing anything useful. Beside him stood a broad-shouldered deputy holding a fresh stack of notices. "Wanted." The word hit Delia before the face did. The sketch was rough, beard heavier, hair shorter, but there was no mistaking the eyes. The reward below it was enough to buy her saloon clear, settle Tom's old freight debt, and put a roof over every cracked board in the place. Wanted in Colorado for bank murder. Wanted in Nebraska for arson. Wanted in Kansas for killing a deputy and fleeing lawful custody. Elias saw the poster in the sheriff's hand. She saw him understand that she saw. That was the moment the world broke. Not when the notices went up. Not when Jonas Creed's name came back into the valley like bad weather. It broke when Delia Quinn, who had spent 4 years surviving by trusting nobody she could not bury herself, looked at the wanted man in her doorway and knew with sick, unmistakable certainty that she did not believe the paper. Sheriff Wren was still talking when she stepped forward and took the notices from his deputy. "I'll hang one inside," she said. "For the travelers." Wren gave her a lazy grin. You do that. Big money for whichever soul turns him in. Delia folded the poster once, twice, and slid it beneath the bar where Elias could not see her hands shake. The whole town had just been offered a price for the violin player. And upstairs, in the lining of his case, though she did not yet know it, he was carrying the one thing in the territory that could ruin Jonas Creed forever. By noon the story had spread clean through Juniper Crossing. It always did. News traveled quicker than mercy in small towns. Delia heard the reward discussed over beer, over coffee, over sacks of flour in Mrs. Trotter's dry goods. $1,500 made honest people imaginative. Elias stayed in the upstairs room all morning with the curtains pulled. Delia sent Mateo up with bread, coffee, and a basin. The boy came down whispering as if he had been in church. He asked after the homesteader girl. He fixed the latch on his own door. He got scars all down one side like rope burn. Late afternoon brought Jonas Creed himself. He came in smiling, which was always worse than when men like him shouted. Creed dressed finer than the town around him. Black coat cut close, vest watch chain bright as a dare. His hair was iron gray at the temples, his face broad and handsome in the way some houses remain handsome after you learn what was done in them. Benton Crow walked 2 steps behind with his split ear and his dead man's eyes. Creed tipped his hat to Delia like she was hosting a social call. Mrs. Quinn, I'm sorry for the disturbance at the creek. Tense times. Folks get confused about what belongs to whom. Water belongs to whoever the Lord sends it to, Delia said. He smiled wider. The Lord signs very little. Men do. He rested one gloved hand on the bar. You're behind on your notes, I'm afraid. Tom Quinn's old freight paper rolls over Saturday. Shame to lose such a respectable establishment over bookkeeping. Delia felt heat rise up the back of her neck. Tom's debt. Tom's death. Tom's name in Creed's mouth like something chewed. You came to discuss paper? I came to be neighborly. And to mention there's a dangerous man in the territory. If you see him, do the sensible thing. Men who kill across 3 states seldom improve in Wyoming. When he left, he let his fingers trail over the bar top as if measuring it for a coffin. That evening Delia carried the folded wanted poster upstairs. Elias was sitting on the floor by the bed with the violin apart in his lap. Not polishing. Not repairing. Opening it. He looked up once and saw the paper in her hand. So, he said. So. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Wind pressed dust against the window screen. Down below, someone laughed too hard at nothing. Delia handed him the poster. He did not look at it. If you aim to turn me in, do it before dark. I'm too tired to run in circles. She leaned against the door and folded her arms. Did you kill those men? No. Any of them. He looked at the floorboards. 1. In Colorado. He came through a hotel room door with a can of kerosene while my wife and little girl were sleeping in the next room. I killed him before he could get there. Creed called that murder and set the rest in motion. There it was. Not all of it. Enough. Then tell the next part. He let out a breath like it hurt him. I kept books for Jonas Creed. Played supper rooms when he wanted guests feeling civilized. 3 states worth of land transfers, water theft, cattle laundering, hired killings dressed up as rustler accidents. I copied what I could when I understood what he was doing. Thought I'd get it to a judge in Denver. Creed found out. The hotel burned. My family didn't get out. After that he put my name under every crime he needed covered. By the time I crawled clear, I was wanted from Kansas to the Front Range. And you came here why? He ran a thumb over the violin's open seam. Because Creed sent for something. A federal examiner rode into this valley with authority to review his claims. Same sort of man turned up dead in the wash this morning. Creed's not buying land here, Mrs. Quinn. He's burying people under it. What's in the fiddle? A copy ledger. Names. Dates. Parcel numbers. Bribes. He gave the smallest, bitter smile. Turns out a violin case draws less interest than a satchel. Men expect music to be harmless. Delia was quiet. $1,500. A clear debt. Safety bought with someone else's neck. The easy path sat right there between them like a warm stove. Then she thought of Tom Quinn coming home the week before he died, tired to the bone, saying only, there are men in this territory who think they can ride over a family the way rain rides over dust. And she remembered how she had done nothing with that, because grief had not yet come for her, and she still believed decency explained itself in the end. It did not. She crossed the room, took the basin from the washstand, and set it at Elias's feet. Take off the shirt. He blinked. What? Your arm's half stuck to your sleeve. If I'm harboring a wanted man, I'd prefer he not die of stupidity before supper. He stared at her like trust was a language he had not heard in years. When he finally peeled the shirt free, the wound proved long and angry, a graze across the upper arm, reopened by travel. Delia cleaned it while he sat rigid as a fence post and looked anywhere but at her face. Up close he smelled of road dust, cedar resin, and the kind of exhaustion that never slept all the way. Why help me? He asked at last. She tied the bandage tight. A person can live a long time on what they refuse to say. Doesn't mean they ain't starving. I'm tired of starving on silence. That was the first line he carried like a coal for the rest of the story. Downstairs that night the usual crowd came thinner and more watchful. Mrs. Sutter sat by the window with her knitting held like a weapon. Old Reverend Cole, who always smelled faintly of apples and horse liniment, drank coffee he claimed was medicinal. Wren drifted in twice, fishing with his eyes. Delia played dumb and charged full price. Around 9, Elias came down clean-shaven except for a shadow he couldn't help, hair trimmed close by Mateo's proud, uneven hand. 2 men at the poker table looked up too fast and then looked away. A wanted face was harder to spot once it looked human. Elias took the chair by the stove and lifted the violin. The room listened. Outside, Juniper Crossing held its breath between wind gusts. Inside, Delia watched the reward poster burn slowly in the stove's orange mouth. She had fed it in one strip at a time, not because she enjoyed drama, because some choices deserved to be seen while they were being made. And if you had been standing where she stood that night, with enough money on a single sheet of paper to buy back half a life, would you have hidden him or handed him over? That was the question sitting in the firelight while the wanted man played. The storm came a day later. It started small, as bad things often do. Benton Crow accused Mateo of stealing oats and dragged him into the street by the collar. When Delia came out with a shotgun and Mrs. Sutter came out with a cast-iron pan and Reverend Cole came out with the kind of old anger preachers keep for special occasions, Crow let the boy go laughing and said he'd only been teaching manners. Then smoke lifted from the north edge of town. The Peel homestead barn went up first, dry as a hymn book in August. By the time buckets reached it, half the roof had fallen. Mrs. Peel stood in the yard with both hands over her mouth and cinders settling in her gray hair. Her youngest child kept asking where the milk cow had gone. No one answered because they could hear the animal screaming from inside the blaze. Creed's riders were nowhere to be seen. By evening, Sheriff Wren had arrested Mateo for the dead federal examiner, citing no reason better than convenience and the fact the boy was poor. Elias said nothing for a long time after they heard. Then he rose, went upstairs, and came back wearing his coat. You go out there now, Delia said. You won't reach the jailhouse steps. I can't let the boy hang in my place. Your place? She stepped close enough to make him look at her. You think this began with you? Creed killed my husband 4 years ago over freight papers tied to river rights. I buried Tom and kept pouring whiskey because that was what survival looked like. Don't you dare stride off noble and alone now that the fire's reached your fence. You stay. You think. For once in your life, maybe stop running long enough to win. His jaw worked once. Twice. Then a sound came from the back room. Not loud. A board knocked loose under a boot. Elias moved first. Fast. So fast Delia only understood he had crossed the floor when the lamp chimney exploded and the room went black. Men came through the kitchen door and the alley entrance at once. Short breaths. Boot heels. One curse. Then the hard crack of wood on bone. Delia hit the floor. Glass sprayed over her skirt. A hand caught her arm and hauled her toward the pantry. Elias shoved the violin case against her chest. Cellar, he said. Gunfire punched splinters from the wall. They ran bent double through spilled flour and fallen crockery. Down the narrow stairs into the root cellar, where potatoes and turnips had kept better company than most men Delia knew. She heard Mateo's old hound howling outside. Heard Mrs. Sutter beating on somebody with something metal. Heard Creed's riders overturning the bar upstairs. Elias dropped the hatch and braced it with a rake handle. How many exits? Cole chute. Too narrow. For a man that size, maybe. For grief, no. Even then, cornered in dirt and dark with the whole world trying to cave in, he gave her a brief, incredulous look that almost passed for life. The hatch slammed above them. Voices. Crows among them. Find the fiddle. Delia stared. They ain't here for you. No, Elias said quietly. They're here for what proves it. There was just enough lamplight from the coal slit to see his face. Blood ran from a cut at his temple. He set the violin case on a potato crate and sprang the false lining with one thumbnail. Papers, folded thin and waxed against weather, lay inside. Delia looked from the documents to the floorboards beneath the crate and remembered, all at once and with such force it made her knees weak, the hollow spot Tom had built under the back bar himself. Said every saloon needed a place to hide receipts from drunks and dignity from creditors. After he died, she had never pried it up. Couldn't bear to touch the carpentry of his hands. Wait, she whispered. Tom kept something. Above them the saloon groaned under boots and violence. They crawled through the coal slit, came up black with soot in the alley, and circled to the back while the raid was still tearing through the front. Smoke poured from a shattered kitchen window. Mrs. Sutter, bless her hard old bones, was on the boardwalk striking Benton Crow's shoulder with a stove poker while Reverend Cole shouted scripture no man there intended to obey. Delia ducked through the rear entrance, Elias on her heels. The hidden board came up under her fingers as if Tom had been waiting for years for her to trust what he had left. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, sat a packet of telegraph copies, freight ledgers, and one notarized survey bearing Jonas Creed's signature where it should never have been. Elias stared at the papers. Your husband had the rest. He died for them. No, Delia said, hearing the truth out loud for the first time. He died because he wouldn't hand them over. That was the revelation that changed the shape of everything. Creed had not come to Juniper Crossing by chance. He had finished, years apart and by two different roads, the same work of theft and murder against them both. They almost made it to the livery. Crow caught them by the side gate with 3 riders and a lantern, throwing everyone into jerking shadows. Elias shoved Delia behind him, one hand on the violin case, the other empty. Crow smiled through a split lip Mrs. Sutter had given him. Been wanting to meet the musician proper. Take me, Elias said. Let her walk. Crow hit him with the rifle, but before the sentence finished, Delia lunged and got thrown into the fence so hard the world flashed white. By the time her sight returned, Elias was on his knees, wrists tied, blood dropping off his chin into the dirt. Dawn, Crow said. Mr. Creed likes public business done in daylight. He hauled Elias upright and rode him away under guard while Delia lay in the mud tasting iron and failure. That was the highest point of the storm, and it felt exactly like storms do when you are inside them, loud, blind, and personal. Juniper Crossing did not sleep much that night. Men who had done nothing for years found reasons to stay by windows. Women carried coffee where fear had gathered. Mrs. Sutter sat at Delia's kitchen table with an egg-sized swelling on one knuckle and said, Well, you gonna cry or you gonna cook that bastard? Delia pressed a rag to her split brow and said, Both, if time allows. They held Elias in the old ice house by the rail siding because the jail smelled too much like witnesses. Delia went near Dawn with coffee, bandages, and Tom's packet under her coat. Reverend Cole walked with her. He did not speak until they reached the tracks. When a good person is tired enough, he said, they begin confusing endurance for surrender. Delia looked straight ahead. I've done that. I know. Crow let her in because men like Crow never understood tenderness could be more dangerous than guns. Elias sat chained to an iron ring, one eye swelling shut, shirt torn at the collar. He lifted his head when she entered, and the whole room changed temperature. I had it wrong, he said before she could speak. All these years I thought I was running toward a judge and away from a grave. Truth is, I've just been running. Delia knelt with the bandage. Hold still. He laughed once, painful and soft. You do like giving orders. Only to men inclined toward foolish exits. She cleaned the blood from his face. He did not flinch until her fingers brushed the old burn scar near his jaw. My little girl liked the violin because she said it sounded like somebody trying to tell the truth gentle, he murmured. I kept playing after they died because if I stopped, it felt like losing them a second time. Delia's hand stilled. I haven't told anyone that, he said. She swallowed against the ache climbing into her throat. Tom whittled whistles, she said. Badly. Everyone shrill as a kettle. I kept the worst one because he laughed when he made it. Haven't blown it since he died. Felt like betraying the quiet. He looked at her then with that stripped bare honesty sorrow sometimes leaves behind when it has taken everything else. Delia. Yes. The heart is a stubborn ranch. Burn it once, and it still tries to green. That was her line. The one the story had been walking toward without either of them knowing it. She closed her eyes because if she didn't, she would have kissed him from grief alone, and grief deserved better than being mistaken for all the things it wasn't. When she opened them, she set Tom's packet in his lap. We don't need a judge from Denver. Judge Markham's inspection train stops for water at noon. Creed means to hang you before the train whistles in, so there'll be no mouth left to speak. We are going to inconvenience him. He stared at the papers, then at her. We. She almost smiled. A person can live a long time on silence. I believe I mentioned that. He caught her wrist before she stood. Not rough. Not desperate. Just enough to stop the moment from ending too quickly. If there's a life on the far side of this, he said, voice low, I'd like to arrive there still standing where you can see me. For some of us, that kind of tenderness hits the old bruises we carry quiet. If it's catching you somewhere tender too, you're exactly who these stories are for, and you already know how much a like or a subscribe helps keep them coming. Then stay with us, because Juniper Crossing was about to find out what happens when the overlooked stop behaving overlooked. Creed built his morning like a parade. That was his mistake. He had Elias dragged to the lot beside the stock pens where half the town could be made witness and the other half could be made warning. Wren stood nearby polishing the same patch of badge. Benton Crow wore a fresh bandage and a fresh grin. Creed himself sat his black gelding as if the valley had been created for the comfort of his boots. Delia arrived in the crowd wearing Tom Quinn's old brown coat. Mrs. Sutter stood at her left with the survey packet hidden inside her knitting basket. Reverend Cole stood at her right holding a Bible fat enough to conceal telegraph copies. Mateo, recently sprung from the icehouse lock by a liveryman with proper priorities, moved through the edge of the crowd gathering folks. Creed had wronged one fence line at a time. Elias was bruised, bound, and upright. Creed lifted a hand for silence. This man has brought murder and lawlessness into our valley. We will hand him to the proper authorities after local order is restored. You mean after you kill him first, Delia said. She did not shout. She did not need to. Some voices are heard because they have been quiet too long. Heads turned. Creed's smile thinned. Delia stepped into the open. Mrs. Peel, tell them who burned your barn. Crow's men. The widow called at once, voice shaking but clear. Same saddle stamp as Creed's, East String. Mateo, tell them who killed the government examiner. Mateo swallowed, looked once at Elias, then pointed with a hand that shook only at the fingertips. Crow had his ring. Tried trading it for whiskey behind the livery. Crow lunged. Wren caught his sleeve too late to look innocent. Creed laughed. This is frontier gossip dressed in a widow's coat. Then let's dress it better, Delia said. Mrs. Sutter handed over the survey. Reverend Cole handed over the telegraphs. Elias, still tied, lifted his head and began speaking dates. Not guessing. Not pleading. Reciting. Parcel numbers. Bribe amounts. Water rights rerouted from homesteads in Colorado, then Nebraska, then Kansas. Judges paid. Deputies bought. Fires ordered. Names of dead men Creed had entered as rustlers after having them shot. Elias had memorized the ledgers by turning every column into scales and measures, every transaction into a phrase of music too exact to forget. He spoke like a man finally setting down a load that had bent his whole life crooked. The inspection train whistled in the distance. Creed's composure cracked first in the eyes, then in the mouth. He's lying. Am I? Elias said. Page 7 of the Red Willow transfers. 2,000 for the clerk, 500 for the notary, one child dead in the smoke because her father wouldn't sign. The crowd made a sound then. Not loud. Worse. The sound people make when the last excuse leaves the room. Judge Markham stepped down from the train platform with 2 federal marshals and the expression of a man newly informed he had arrived precisely where corruption hoped he wouldn't. Delia walked the papers to him herself. Creed saw the end at the same moment everyone else did, and men like him always choose the same last language. He went for his gun. Elias moved before the draw cleared leather. Not by luck, not by rescue, by the one thing he had learned too late and then held to anyway. Stop running, step toward the danger, and make truth public enough that it cannot be buried with your body. He drove shoulder first into the post his wrists were tied to, snapped the weakened crosspiece misses. Sutter had quietly half-sawn while pretending to adjust her basket and brought the length of timber up into Creed's arm. The shot went wild. Horses reared. The pistol spun into the dirt. Crow reached for Delia and found Reverend Cole's Bible breaking his nose. Then the marshals were on them. Creed screaming. Wren dragged from his badge like a child pulled off a lie. Crow face first in stockyard mud. It ended quickly because the long work had already been done by those who finally chose to stand where they could be seen. Justice, when it arrived, did not gallop. It clicked shut like handcuffs. By sunset, Jonas Creed's accounts were seized, his deeds frozen, his riders scattered, and every false claim on Sweetwater water under federal review. Wren lost his badge. Crow lost 3 teeth, and what little future a man like him might have had. Mrs. Peel got 2 milk cows bought from Creed's own impounded stock. Mateo got paid wages for the first honest work the livery had ever admitted he'd done. Tom Quinn's debt paper vanished into legal evidence and never came back out. And Elias Shaw, whose true name was Silas Rook, stood on Delia's boardwalk in the blue quiet after the longest day of his life, while Judge Markham read the formal suspension of every warrant bearing Creed's influence until review could be completed. "You may still have law-chasing shadows of your name in some counties," Markham said, folding the order. "But you are no longer running alone." Silas took the paper like men take fragile things when they are afraid hope might hear and leave. The town changed slowly enough to be believed. That mattered. Miracles are harder to trust than chores. Folks came to the saloon because Delia's coffee got better and because Mrs. Sutter told everyone she had once personally assisted in the arrest of a cattle tyrant, which was true if you counted a stove poker as jurisprudence. Silas repaired the piano. Mateo learned to rosin a bow. On cold nights, when the lamps turned every window into amber, Delia would be taking accounts and look up to find Silas watching her with the calm amazement of a man who had lived too long without expecting morning. He did not leave. Not that week. Not when the first review hearing passed in Cheyenne. Not when the federal notices went out clearing him in Colorado and reopening cases in Nebraska and Kansas under oath. He stayed through fence mending and stove fixing and a spring thaw that turned Front Street into axle-deep misery. One evening, months later, Delia found Tom's shrill little whistle in the back of a drawer. She set it on the bar beside Silas's violin. He picked it up, tested one note, winced, and laughed. "Bad, isn't it?" "Terrible," he said. "Keep it forever." She reached across the bar. He met her hand halfway. Turns out peace does not come like thunder. It comes like bread rising while somebody you love is still in the room. Years later, when the porch boards had silvered and the cottonwoods along the creek stood taller than the grief that once lived there, folks in Juniper Crossing would say the old Quinn place had the finest music in the territory. On summer evenings, Delia counted receipts with her spectacles low on her nose while Silas played by the open window and children chased fireflies between the hitching posts. Nobody hurried the song. Nobody watched the road in fear. And when the bread came out of the oven and he crossed to cut it warm, Delia would look at him and think that some things, once saved, did not merely survive. They fed everybody around them. Beyond the porch, the last light lay soft across the creek like a ribbon of hammered gold. Next time, stay with us for the story of the deaf seamstress sent west to settle a debt, and the half-blind rancher who saw her worth before anyone else dared to look.